What does she think really happened the night George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin? There's that, whether she thinks race played a role, and a lot more. Here's part one of our exclusive conversation. When you first sat down on the jury, when you first gathered together, what was it like? Did you know how big this was?
It was unreal. It was unreal. It was like something that, why would they want to pick me? You know? Why would I be picked over all these hundreds of people that they interviewed?
And when the trial started, what was the first day like? There were the opening statements. Don West told a joke. What did you think of that?
The joke was horrible. Nobody got it. I didn't get it till later, and then I thought about it, and I'm like, I guess that could have been funny, but not in the context he told it.
Going into the trial, did you have an idea in your mind about what happened?
No, because I hadn't followed the trial at all. I mean, I had heard bits and pieces of what had happened and the names that were involved, but not any details.
So take me back, if you can, to that first day, the opening statements. What do you remember about them? What stood out to you?
Not a whole lot, because it seems like it's been years ago that it happened. It does. It seems like it's been a very long time that we were there.
Was there a particular witness that stands out to you? Who did you find to be the most credible?
The doctor in Stop, and I don't know his name.
The doctor that the defense called?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
What about him?
I thought he was awe-inspiring. The experiences he had over in the war, and I just never thought of anybody that could recognize somebody's voice yelling in like a terrible terror voice when he was just previously a half hour ago playing cards with them.
This was the witness that the friend of George Zimmerman's who had military experience.
No, this was the defense.
This was the defense medical examiner.
Yeah.
Okay. What was it like day by day, just being on that jury?
Day by day was interesting. There were more interesting things than others. When they got into the evidence, it was a lot more interesting than just testimony. Some of the witnesses were good. Some of them not so good.
Did you feel, a lot of the analysts who were watching the trial felt that the defense attorneys, Mark O'Mara, Don West, were able to turn prosecution witnesses to their advantage? Chris Serino, for instance, the lead investigator. Did he make an impression on you?
Chris Serino did. To me, he just was doing his job. He was doing his job the way he was doing his job, and he was going to tell the truth regardless of who asked him the questions.
So you found him to be credible?
I did. Very credible.
When he testified that he found George Zimmerman to be more or less and overall truthful, did that make an impression on you?
It did. It did. It made a big impression on me.
Why?
Because he deals with this all the time. He deals with, murder, robberies. He's in it all the time. And I think he has a knack to pick out who's lying and who's not lying.
The prosecution started off by saying that George Zimmerman was on top in the struggle. And then later on, they seemed to concede, well, perhaps Trayvon Martin was on top, but maybe was pulling away. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that the prosecution really had a firm idea of what actually happened?
I think they wanted to happen what they wanted to happen, to go to their side, for the prosecution of the state. There was a lot, the witnesses that the defense had on, plus some of the prosecution witnesses, there was no doubt that they had seen what had happened. Some of it was taped, so they couldn't rebut any of that.
What was on the 911 tapes?
Mm-hmm. 911 tapes and the John Good calling and all of that.
How significant were those 911 tapes to you?
The Lauer tape was the most significant because it went through before the struggle, during the struggle, the gunshot, and then after.
You had the parents of Trayvon Martin testifying. You had the family of George Zimmerman, friends of George Zimmerman testifying about whose voice it was in the 911 call. Mm-hmm. Whose voice do you think it was in the 911 call?
I think it was George Zimmerman's.
Did everybody on the jury agree with that?
All but probably one.
And what made you think it was George Zimmerman's voice?
Because of the evidence that he was the one that had gotten beaten.
So you think because he was the one who had cuts, had abrasions, he was the one getting hit, he was the one calling for help?
Well, because the witnesses of John Good saw Trayvon on top of George, not necessarily hitting him because it was so dark he couldn't see, but he saw blows down towards George. And he could tell that it was George Zimmerman on the bottom. He didn't know who it was, but he knew what they were wearing.
The juror who didn't think it was George Zimmerman's voice, who thought it was Trayvon Martin's voice in that call, do you know why they felt that way?
Well, she didn't think it was Trayvon. She just said it could have been Trayvon's.
So she wasn't even sure?
No. She wanted to give everybody absolute out of being guilty.
But you were sure it was George Zimmerman's voice?
I was sure it was George Zimmerman.
And everybody else in the jury was? Except for that
one person? I think so. I think they were. I don't think there was a doubt that everybody else thought it was George's voice.
I want to ask you I want to ask you about some of the different witnesses. Rachel Gentile, the woman who was on the phone with Trayvon Martin at the start of the incident. What did you make of her testimony?
I didn't think it was very credible, but I felt very sorry for her. She didn't ask to be in this place. She wanted to go. She wanted to leave. She didn't want to be any part of this jury. I think she felt inadequate toward everyone because of her education and her communication skills. I just felt sadness for her.
You felt like, what, she was in over her head?
Well, not over her head. She just didn't want to be there. And she was embarrassed by being there because of her education and her communication skills that she just wasn't a good witness.
Did you find it hard at times to understand what she was saying?
A lot of the times. Because a lot of the times she was using phrases I have never heard before and what they meant.
When she used the phrase, creepy-ass cracker, what did you think of that?
I thought it was probably the truth. I think Trayvon probably said that.
And did you see that as a negative statement or a racial statement, as the defense suggested?
I don't think it's really racial. I think it's just everyday life. The type of life that they live and how they're living and the environment that they're living in.
So you didn't find her credible as a witness?
No.
So did you find her testimony important in terms of what she actually said?
Well, I think the most important thing is the time that she was on the phone with Trayvon. So you basically, hopefully, if she heard anything, she would say she did, but the time coincides with George's statements and testimony of time limits and what had happened during that time.
Explain that.
Well, because George was on the 911 call while she was on the call with Trayvon, and the times coincide, and I think there was 2 minutes between when George hung up from his 911 call to the time Trayvon and Rachel had hung up. So really nothing could have happened because the 911 call would have heard, the non-emergency call that George had called, heard something happening before that.
She said at one point that she heard the sound of wet grass. Did that seem believable to you?
Well, everything was wet at that point. It was pouring down rain.
What did you think of George Zimmerman?
I think George Zimmerman is a man whose heart was in the right place, but just got displaced by the vandalism in the neighborhoods and wanting to catch these people so badly that he went above and beyond what he really should have done. But I think his heart was in the right place. It just went terribly wrong.
Do you think he's guilty of something?
I think he's guilty of not using good judgment. When he was in the car and he called 911, he shouldn't have gotten out of that car. But the 911 operator also, when he was talking to him, kind of egged him on. I don't know if it's their policy to tell them what to do, not to get out of the car, to stay in their car. But I think he should have said, stay in your car, not can you see where he's gone.
Do you feel George Zimmerman should have been carrying a gun?
I think he has every right to carry a gun. I think it's everybody's right to carry a gun, as long as they use it the way it's supposed to be used and be responsible in using it.
George Zimmerman obviously did not testify, but his testimony essentially was brought into the trial through those videotapes, a number of videotapes. That he walked police through a reenactment of what he said happened. How important were those videotapes to you?
I don't really know, because, I mean, watching the tapes, there's always something in the back saying, is it right? Is it consistent? But with all the evidence of the phone calls and all the witnesses that he saw, I think George was pretty consistent in told the truth, basically. I'm sure there were some fabrications, enhancements, but I think pretty much it happened the way George said it happened.
When George Zimmerman said that Trayvon Martin reached for his gun, though there was no DNA evidence, and the defense said, well, had testimony in, well, it could have got washed off in the rain or the like, do you believe that Trayvon Martin reached for George Zimmerman's gun?
I think he might have. I think George probably thought that he did, because George was the one who knew that George was carrying a gun. And he was aware of that.
You can't say for sure whether or not Trayvon Martin knew that George Zimmerman was carrying a gun.
No.
So you can't say for sure whether or not Trayvon Martin reached for that gun.
Right. But that doesn't make it right. I mean, it doesn't make, there's not a right or a wrong. Even if he did reach for the gun, it doesn't make any difference.
How so?
Well, because George had a right to protect himself at that point.
So you believe that George Zimmerman really felt his life was in danger?
I do. I really do.
Do you think Trayvon Martin threw the first punch?
I think he did.
What makes you think that?
Because of the evidence of on the tee or on the sidewalk where George says he was punched. There was evidence of his flashlight and keys there, and then a little bit farther down there was a flashlight that he was carrying. And I think that's where Trayvon hit him.
So you think, based on the testimony you heard, you believe that Trayvon Martin was the aggressor?
I think the roles changed. I think George got in a little bit too deep, which he shouldn't have been there. But Trayvon decided that he wasn't going to let him scare him and get the one over up on him or something. And I think Trayvon got mad and attacked him.
Do you feel like you know for sure what happened in the altercation? And did the other jurors feel for sure that they knew what happened?
Nobody knew exactly what happened. I mean, it started at one point and ended at another point. Witnesses said they heard left to right movement. Other witnesses said they heard right to left movement. But the credible witnesses said they heard left to right movement. So whatever happened, I think the punch came, and then they ended up in the back of the house. I don't think anybody knows.
When the defense, in their closing argument, played that animation of what they believe happened, did you find that credible?
I found it credible. I did.
What did you think of the testimony of Trayvon Martin's mother and father? Did you find them credible?
I think they said anything a mother and father would say, just like George Zimmerman's mom and father. I think they're your kids. You want to believe that they're innocent and that was their voice, because hearing that voice would make it credible, but that they were the victim, not the aggressor.
So in a way, both sets of parents kind of canceled each other out in your mind?
They did, definitely. Because if I was a mother, I would want to believe so hard that it was not my son that did that or was responsible for any of that, that I would convince myself probably that it was his voice.
How critical, though, was it for you in your mind to have an idea of whose voice it was yelling for help? I mean, how important was that yell for help?
I think it was pretty important, because it was a long cry and scream for help, that whoever was calling for help was in fear of their life.
The prosecution didn't use the word racial profiling during the case. They used the word profiling. And that was something that was worked out between the judge and the lawyers when the jury wasn't in the room.
Right.
Do you feel that George Zimmerman racially profiled Trayvon Martin? Do you think race played a role in his decision, his view of Trayvon Martin as suspicious?
I don't think he did. I think just circumstances caused George to think that he might be a robber or trying to do something bad in the neighborhood because of all that had gone on previously. There were unbelievable a number of robberies in the neighborhood.
So you don't believe race played a role in this case?
I don't think it did. I think if there was another person, Spanish, white, Asian, if they came in the same situation where Trayvon was, I think George would have reacted the exact same way.
Why do you think George Zimmerman found Trayvon Martin suspicious then?
Because he was cutting through the back. It was raining. He said he was looking in houses as he was walking down the road, kind of just not having a purpose to where he was going. He was stopping and starting. But that's George's rendition of it. But I think the situation where Trayvon got into, him being late at night, dark at night, raining, and anybody would think anybody walking down the road, stopping and turning and looking, if that's exactly what happened, is suspicious. And George had said that he didn't recognize who he was.
Well, was that a common belief on the jury that race did not play a role in this?
I think all of us thought race did not play a role.
So nobody felt race played a role?
I don't think so.
None of the jurors?
I can't speak for them. I'm not
that
their
wasn't
voice.
part of the discussion in the jury room?
No, we never had that discussion.
It didn't come up, the question of, did George Zimmerman profile Trayvon Martin because he was African American?
No, I think he just profiled him because he was the neighborhood watch, and he profiled anybody that came in acting strange. I think it was just circumstances happened that he saw Trayvon at the exact time that he thought he was suspicious.
The prosecution tried to paint George Zimmerman as a wannabe cop, overeager. Did you buy that?
I think he's overeager to help people. Like the lady who got broken in and robbed while her baby and her were upstairs. He came over and he offered her a lock for her backsliding glass door. He offered her his phone number, his wife's phone number. He told her that she could come over if she felt stressed or she needed anybody. Come over to their house, sit down, have dinner. Not anybody. You have to have a heart to do that and care to help people.
So you didn't find it creepy you didn't find it a negative? That you didn't buy the prosecution when they kind of said he was a wannabe cop?
No, I didn't at all.
Is George Zimmerman somebody you would like to have on a neighborhood watch in your community?
If he didn't go too far. You can always go too far. He just didn't stop at the limitations that he should have stopped at.
So, is that a yes, or that if he didn't go too far, is he somebody prone, you think, to going too far? Is he somebody you would feel comfortable?
Frustrated. I think he was frustrated with the whole situation in the neighborhood, with the break-ins and the robberies, and they actually arrested somebody not that long ago. I would feel comfortable having George, but I think he's learned a good lesson.
So you would feel comfortable having him now because you think he's learned a lesson from all of this?
Exactly. I think he just didn't know when to stop. He was frustrated, and things just got out of hand.
People have now remarked subsequently that he gets his gun back, and there are some people who have said the idea that he can have a gun worries them. Does that worry you?
That doesn't worry me. I think he'd be more responsible than anybody else on this planet right now.